Hey everyone, and welcome to Yolanda's Digital Diary. Today we are at Constitutional Hill. We're attending the inaugural Feminist conference or gathering, and I was asked to actually just participate and share my story and be part of the program. So I decided, why not film this and show you guys a bit of, a glimpse of my day, what I do as work, what I do as activism, and I hope you guys enjoy the content. It's not a lot, but it is still very feminist inspired and very fuck shit up.
Once I've told my story, you don't have to give me advice. I've told you, and I'm fine. So, over to you, Yolanda.
Thank you. I rushed it to the front. Good afternoon, everyone. Yes, Yankee, and it is spelled wrong, I believe. It's not with the J, it's a T-Y-I at the end. So I am here to speak about why is it important to share one story, my story, your story. So I'd like to first thank you all for your time and your attention. And I think the best way to really get into this, I'm not as prepared as my previous speaker. Monday said she's got like a whole presentation, all of that, but I've just got this. But I think the best way to get into it is telling you about my story, my journey and experience of being a young black woman living in, the so-called democratic South Africa, constitutional South Africa. I am Yolanda, as I said. I'm a 23-year-old, soon to be 23-year-old, Xhosa-speaking woman from Johannesburg. I was born and raised here under the protection and guidance of my grandmother, whom I affectionately refer to as my mother. The woman who first introduced me to different schools or the idea of feminism, to resistance, to strength, to love, and to solidarity. You see, my grandmother was a domestic worker, and I say was because she is now a retired pensioner living in the mountainous rural areas of the Eastern Cape, working and taking care of the land of our forefathers. I was raised by my grandmother, who, many of you might be able to relate with the fact that many black low-income families were and still are matriarchal in the sense that they are headed by the eldest woman in the house. Often who's the grandmother because, the mother, for a lot of reasons, is unable to do so. Many of those reasons, include going to work, and in my case, my birth mother had me at 20 years old. She was 20, and my grandmother then opted to raise me as she was still a young adult, still wanting to live her best life, and to forge her own paths as a young woman. I don't know my father, which is something also unfortunately very common in black communities, absent fathers. Growing up in the suburbs of Ferndale, Randburg, I was privileged enough, and I say this, I use the word very loosely, to be sheltered from many of the world's darkness. My grandmother and I lived in the back room of her former white employer's home, where I was exposed to what it is like to have almost everything one might need to live a so-called comfortable life and a safe life. That is, my grandmother worked hard to give me the future she didn't have, one where I was exposed to the culture of whiteness, of power, of access. I attended relatively good schools, what were formerly known as Model C, or white schools now in post-apartheid South Africa, which had opened their doors to people like me, children of domestic workers. We were then allowed and given this access to a space that was not designed for us before. So my grandmother has always had belief in me. She instilled confidence in me to not be ashamed of where I come from. And in the words also of our current Miss Universe, Zozibini Tunzi, she groomed me to take up space and to cement myself in places that made me feel inferior, solely because I am black, a woman, and poor. Not once. And I'd be lying to say there haven't been a few people here and there who have been successful in doing so, but not once have I ever allowed anyone to make me feel less than what I thought of myself. Because I've always grown up being told that my journey is mine alone and that no one else has the same life as I do. There's something absolutely remarkable about that if you think about it, how 8 billion people currently living in this world share the same amount of hours, right? We all have 24 hours, but we have completely different life experiences. No matter how we may share similar experiences, there's always more to it, what we young people like to refer to as nuance to one's life's journey than that meets the eye. Fast forward forward to life after high school. I matriculated in 2014 with a bachelor's degree admission to university. And this was possibly one of the second best news my grandmother has received after being accepted to one of the country's prestigious universities, Rhodes University. It was an affirmation that the woman who raised me, with all the struggles she had to endure as a single black woman, earning lower than a minimum wage salary, that she had done well and her efforts were not in vain. I arrived as a starry-eyed first-year student at Rhodes, filled with ambition and excitement to reinvent myself as the young adult that I was, stepping into, and the young adult that I was, who had now found an abundance of freedom, free from the loving but very overprotective noose that my grandmother had around my neck, free to do whatever I wanted, whatever time I chose, free to discover myself in a completely new environment, living in a small isolated town called Grahamstown, or to be politically correct, Emakanda. It was such a thrilling feeling for me, to be the first black woman of my generation in my entire family to go to university and to represent my family's name, but importantly to pursue my dreams in a space with endless opportunities. University spaces are quite exciting in the sense that there's so many schools of thoughts in one space, with thousands of individuals in pursuit of the realization of our dreams, our ideas, and aspirations for this world. I then got raped and sexually violated in May 2015, in my first year as a university student. I had gone out to attend a society event, an AGM, where all the members of the society I was a part of had gathered to attend this AGM and to enjoy a night out as members of the society. Little did I know that I was sitting right next to what would be the person who perpetrated me and took advantage of me. For months after that incident, I carried a great sense of guilt and shame with me for not remembering what had happened on that night, because I blacked out and woke up in my res room wearing a stranger's t-shirt over the dress that I was wearing at the AGM, but now it was also covered in semen stains. I blamed myself for what had happened to me, for perhaps drinking a glass too many of wine and naively trusting in a total stranger, a male figure. Up until that night, I was aware of violence, not only to this extent that I was exposed to it, I was aware of violence, but only to the extent that I was exposed to it, which had never been directly in relation to me. I should mention briefly that I got date rape drugged and only realized this months later through flashbacks and nightmares I would have of what actually happened to me on that night. I was raped by two men on the same night, whom, when I actually did, get a chance to confront them, they were friends. They admitted to taking advantage of me, but for them it was not rape. It was just harmless fun. And these men were friends, men whom I'd never met at all on campus before until that night at the AGM. As a result of my experience, I was further propelled to actively being a defender for women's rights, my own rights. I vigorously read upon and became inspired by other women's rights and feminist activists who have written and spoken about and shared their stories on why they began to dissent, to rise up against patriarchy, racism, and sexism. Bell Hooks, Toni Morrison, Winnie Madikizela Mandela, my grandmother. These are some of the great women who I've been inspired by their own stories of persistent resistance against this violent and hyper-heterosexual society. One of the platforms of dissent and opposition that I used to share my story, to actively call for systemic change against gender-based violence, was in the anti-rape culture protests in April 2016. I was doing my second year and almost 1 year after I got raped. They began a movement born from social media, much alike the total shutdown story, which saw over 1,000 women students at Rhodes University and supporters participate in disrupting the patriarchy. After months and years of being silenced by an institution that failed to protect victims and survivors of gender-based violence and not creating safer mechanisms to ensure that in the likelihood of there being an incident of gender-based violence, there would be processes actively put in place to ensure justice for the victim and survivor. Perhaps explaining why I choose to use both the words victim and survivor would be helpful for some right now, but I also do it to respect how each person might prefer to refer to their own personal experiences with violence. I don't quite have the English data to succinctly put my thoughts and views on this matter, but I just thought to share it. So this movement erupted in April 2016 under the banner #RU protests, which disrupted the academic proceedings at Rhodes for 2 weeks in order to spotlight the crisis students were facing and as a means to get the institution's management to finally and actively address the scourge of GBV on campus. Mind you, our protest in April 2016, the references protest, inspired a number of other solidarity protests across the country. I know at Wits, there were also protests where students spoke up as well about their own experiences on campus at Forte, and it was just, I guess, a national moment where it spotlighted violence that young women, young adults experience in institutions of higher learning. We broke that silence. So this protest disrupted the academic proceedings at Rhodes for 2 weeks in order to spotlight the crisis and as a means to get the institution's management to finally and actively address the scourge of GBV. It needed to do this by centering the experiences of survivors and victims first, by creating survivor-centered approaches towards the eradication of sexual violence and broader GBV incidents, which meant recognizing that our experiences are shaped by intersectional identities. And I think also Prof. Mzi spoke about the different identities that can be found amongst us in this room as well. And that's what we were championing for. And that broader GBV incident means recognizing that our experiences are shaped by intersectional identities and that the journey to restoring power to a victim and survivor starts by centering the experience as integral to prevention and response measures. I so happened to get excluded at the institution in 2017, now during my 3rd year, upon my former active involvement in the protests. So much had happened between the time the protests erupted to the time of my exclusion a year later, where I was targeted by the leadership of the university, which of course is run by a collective of men and a few women who are supporters and upholders of the patriarchal system. I was doing my 3rd and final year when I was excluded from Rhodes. I had 4 charges leveled against me by the institution through an internal disciplinary board. Mind you, throughout the protests, I was not arrested. I've never been arrested. I do not have a criminal case. But the charges that were leveled against me and a couple of other women who were targeted for their involvement in the protests included kidnapping, defamation of character. Guys, so that was that. I presented. I got to speak to a room of about 50 to 60 women. Yeah, day's over. A glass of wine with 3 would be nice. In a safe environment at home. But yeah, this is what a woman does. I continuously just grace these people with my presence, and I just contribute to feminist discourse. I think it is very important, and I'm glad that I was given this particular topic to speak on, because it's generally what I speak about every day. If you follow me on on my channel, on my social media platforms, I'm a person who's very expressive about what it is that I'm currently going through at that particular time. So I'm really glad that I got to do this right at the beginning of the year as one of my, first public speaking, public appearances. It's just really great, also mingling and hearing other women and what they're doing and their stories and how they're contributing, towards the fight against gender-based violence. So, yay, guys! So, bye-bye. Bye.